Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Nick and welcome back to another episode of Technical. It's the show where Nick talks tech. I'm your host, Nick, so let's talk tech. Today we're going to be talking about stops of light. What are they, how do you measure them, and what is it used for? You'll often hear videographers and photographers talk about stops of light and how something might be too bright or too dark and they'll have to stop down their aperture or something. But what are they really saying? I briefly broke this down in a few other videos I've done already. We'll talk more about stops of light in another video. A stop of light, a change in stops of light, but a stop of light is a relative doubling of light. It's not a finite quantity like 100 watts or 5,000 degrees Kelvin, but rather a comparison between values. For example, between these two scenes we can say that there's a one stop of light difference. The one on the right is twice as bright as the one on the left. But we can also say that this camera can expose for 11 or 12 stops of dynamic range. Basically, you would take the darkest part of your image, double the brightness value again 10 or 11 times until you get the brightest part of your image before it clips. However many doublings you can do before clipping the highlights is how many stops of light your camera can capture. This gets easier to understand with math. Wait, please don't leave. Okay, there are 3 camera settings that can control how much light enters your scene: shutter speed, ISO, and the aperture using f-stops. Technically it should be t-stops, but that's a video for another day. Subscribe so you don't miss it. For now we're going to be sticking with the familiar f-stops. I've made videos already detailing how each one of these camera settings will impact the look of your scene. Links in the description. But today we're only going to be focusing on how these settings will change the amount of light in your scene. First, let's look at aperture. We can take our base numbers of f1 and f1.4 to get the rest of the one-stop increments. Yes, you can get wider apertures than f1, but ignore that for now. It makes the math a lot easier. Indy Mogul already has a great video detailing how to do this on your own, link in the description, but I'm just going to lay out all the f-stops for you. They are f1, f1.4, f2, 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, 22, 32, and so on if your lens is capable of doing that. The difference between each of these apertures is one stop of light, meaning that each time you change from one of these apertures to an adjacent one on this scale, you will change the amount of light in your scene by a factor of 2. It gets twice as bright as the f numbers go down, but twice as dark as the f numbers go up. This also means that going up or down 2 values will quadruple the relative light. For example, going from f4 to f2.8 will double the amount of light in your scene. There's a one stop of light difference. But going from f2.8 to 2 will double it again, another stop of light. So in total, going from f4 to f2 will give you 2 stops of light, which is 4 times the amount of light in your scene. We can then figure out that going from f11 to f4 will give you 8 times the amount of light in your scene. Going from f11 to f8 will double the amount of light in your scene. That's one stop of light. Then going from f8 to f5.6 will double it again, giving you another stop of light. And then going from f5.6 to 4 will double it again, another stop of light. So 2 times 2 times 2 equals 8. Since the amount of light gained or lost by a stop of light is a factor of 2, we could express this as 2 to the third, where the exponent is the number of stops of light changed. But wait, Nick, what if one stop of light changes my scene too much? I need a more finite way of controlling the amount of light in my scene. Well, you can. Most modern cameras and manual lenses have the ability to change f-stops in increments of 1/3 of a stop of light, as well as one stop of light. This can give you a wide range of apertures to choose from, including f4.5, f5, f5.8, f6.3, f7.1, and so on. So every 3 changes on this scale would result in one stop of light difference. A change from f4.5 to 6.3 is a one stop of light difference, just as going from f5.6 to f8 will also change the amount of light in your scene by one stop. With that idea in mind, we can do the same for shutter speed. Ignoring how shutter speed will change the smoothness of our motion, we can use math to figure out how the changes will impact the amount of light in our scene. We can start with a 1 second exposure and half that to give us a 1/2 second exposure. That's a one stop of light difference. Simply cutting the shutter speed in half will darken the amount of light in your scene by a factor of 2, a one stop of light difference. But doubling the shutter speed will increase the amount of light in your scene by a factor of 2, a one stop of light difference. Sometimes this isn't exact though. For example, on this camera, if I chose a 1/60th second exposure and half that, I should get a 1/120th second exposure, but I don't. I end up with a 1/125th second exposure. Why? I guess this is because when you have 1/125th second exposure, you will then end up with a 1/250th second exposure, which is on our scale of 1/3 increments. But why not just have a 1/240th second exposure instead, and half 1/120th? I have no idea. If you know, let me know in the comments down below. But much like the aperture, your camera will probably also allow you to do 1/3 of a stop increments as well as one stop increments. For example, going from 1/60th to 1/50th to 1/40th are all 1/3 of a stop, increments. There are also measurements called shutter angles, which simplifies the math a little bit, but that's a video for another day. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. And finally, ISO. The math on this one is much more expected. We could start with our normal base ISO of 100, and doubling that brings you to 200. That's a one stop of light difference. Doubling that again to 400 will double the amount of light in your scene again, another one stop of light. And then you can continue to double the ISO as needed. Again, your camera will probably let you do 1/3 of a stop of light differences as well as one stop of light differences. So you can get ISO 100, 125, 160, 200, and so on. But 125 is not exactly 1/3 between 100 and 200, but if we double 125, we will get 250, which is again on our scale later on. Rounding up or down in some of these areas makes the math a lot cleaner. Regardless, you have options. So play around with these settings to get the look that you want. So this brings us to our big question of the day. Is this important? Yeah, I think so. Using these relative terms to express brightness can help effectively communicate how you want your scene to look. Stops of light are just another tool you can use to adjust your scene to make it look the way that you want. And we can use math to manipulate our settings to get something that we like. Well, that's it for this video. Did I leave something out or get something wrong? Let me know in the comments down below. Put my sources in the description so you can fact check me. And while you're down there, make sure you like the video, ring that bell for notifications, and subscribe so you don't miss another video. See you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bonus fact. Some cameras have a base ISO or native ISO of 50 instead of 100. Either way, math isn't always super clean.